The consumer, they call us. We're the people that buy, while everyone else is out to sell some kind of merchandise.
Yep, good old Stompin' Tom Connors. If you're a Canadian, you recognize the consumer song, theme song for the old Marketplace show years ago. I think that song is almost 50 years old now and still rather relevant. Thinking today about consumer Christianity, being consumer Christians. Now in economics, a consumer is someone who consumes, really someone who takes more than they need. Perhaps a better phraseology might be one of my profs had in Bible school. He talked about cafeteria Christians. He talked about church people who kind of, did a pick and choose, kind of walked down the smorgasbord and picked a little bit of this and a little bit of that and didn't take any of this or any of that, and just kind of selected what parts of Christianity or following Jesus they wanted and rejected everything else. So whether it's consumer Christianity or cafeteria Christianity, that's kind of what we're talking about today. And in a sense, what a consumer Christian is really going to be defined by these 7 traits we're going to look at. I guess we kind of had this through the title, You Might Be a Consumer Christian If. So here's some risk factors or some possibilities that you might be a consumer Christian. Well, you might be a consumer Christian if you live in North America. Yep, living in North America is a risk factor for being a consumer Christian, because that is the default version of Christianity we have. Really a spectator version, a consumeristic version, a version that really makes it about a show. The way the seating is done, we're all facing forward. We're just kind of, consuming the content. And if you're in North America, you're at risk of being a consumer Christian versus a biblical Christian. Number 2, you might be a consumer Christian if you are a church hopper. Maybe a church hopper or church shopper. I'm talking particularly if you move with some frequency or multiple times between churches in the same community, when you yourself really haven't moved significantly enough geographically to really move churches. Well, church hopping is common. If a church goes through some conflict, some people leave. If a church has a building program, some people leave. If a church doesn't have a building program, when some people think they should, some people leave. If a church gets a new pastor, some people might leave another church to check out the new pastor, and on it goes. But if you find yourself, moving frequently between churches for any or all or other reasons, it might be that you're a consumer Christian. It might in fact be that the issue is you, not the church. Old John Maxwell quote goes something like this: says if Bill has a problem with Carol and Bill has a problem with Jamie and Bill has a problem with Lloyd, then perhaps Bill's the problem. And maybe if you find yourself moving between churches, it's not that there's something particularly wrong with the church. It just might be that you're a consumer Christian, that really you're looking for something to consume that's more in keeping with your flavor, more in keeping with what you're looking for from the smorgasbord at this point. Number 3, you might be a consumer Christian if your primary framework for a church is looking for a church where you are comfortable. Yeah, need to find a church where I'm comfortable, where there's people who are kind of like me. Maybe they're not too rich, They're not too poor. They have the right politics. I was in a men's prayer time some time ago, and we're, being Canadian conservative Christians, lean towards the Conservative Party. A lot of us do. And I remember asking the question this prayer time as we, wound up our praying time, got into the visiting politicking time. I asked the question, would someone who wasn't conservative leaning be welcome in this prayer group? And it was an interesting question. I thought a thought-provoking question, because whether they'd be welcome or not, I don't know if they'd be particularly comfortable. And so, back to consumer Christianity, you might be a consumer Christian if you look for a church where you're comfortable, where the theology and the style and the politics and the demographics kind of don't ruffle your feathers, don't stretch you, or don't challenge you in any way. Number 4, you might be a consumer Christian if you define a good service as a service that you enjoyed. That if you enjoyed the service, that means it was a good service. Now, as a pastor, if somebody tells me they enjoyed the service, I will accept that as a compliment. Sometimes I need to bite my tongue, and I think maybe once I actually said, based on the subject matter of the sermon, that when somebody said they enjoyed the service, I'm pretty sure once I said, you really weren't supposed to. This last weekend, in fact, I preached on hell. Nobody came up to me and said they enjoyed the service. I didn't particularly enjoy the service. The point of the service is not to enjoy it. But if you measure what a, quote, good service is or isn't by how much or how little you enjoyed it, you might be a consumer Christian, because consumer Christians come expecting to be entertained in some measure. Maybe we don't expect to be entertained in the Top Gun Maverick Summer of 2022 blockbuster sense of the word. But we do expect maybe to have our ears tickled, to hear some good stories, to have some music that kind of includes at least one or two of our favorite songs. Like the story of the pastor. One day after church, someone came to him and said, Pastor, I didn't like any of the songs we sang today. And the pastor said, well, that's okay. We weren't singing them to you. Consumer Christians can tend to think that the service is for us. And if it didn't scratch whatever the particular itch was in our lives at the moment, that it, quote, wasn't a good service. Number 5 is somewhat related to this. You might be a consumer Christian if you think the purpose of a given church is to hold church services. If you think that the primary task and function of a church is to hold church services, if you think that's kind of the sum total, it really is maybe the sum total of your Christian life, or the most important part of your Christian life, the going to the service, you might be, and you probably are, a consumer Christian. Now, if there's one thing we learned through the COVID situation, is that a lot of Christians believe that the purpose of the church is to hold services. And when there's some kind of restriction placed on the service, they think that somehow Christianity is being challenged at its core, which is absolutely a crazy idea. To think that Christianity at its core is challenged when we can't gather and sit facing the front and consume. You might be a consumer Christian if you think the purpose of the church is to hold services. Because while gathering together, as a part of the Christian faith, gathering together as we gather together on Sundays is really not what's meant by Hebrews 10:25 that was overly quoted through the time restrictions. Don't forsake the gathering together. So many people who don't think twice about skipping weeks of services to take their kids to sports or go camping or take a holiday or go skiing or whatever, all of a sudden when there's a restriction that said the church couldn't gather in this very particular way, started quoting that verse. And that was an indication that maybe we're consumer Christians, that we somehow think that our ability to practice our faith and to follow Jesus is restricted when we can't gather in a large public gathering. What a skewed version of Christianity that is. Number 6. You might be a consumer Christian if you've used the phrase in complaining about a pastor or a church or a service, if you've used the phrase, I'm not being fed. I'm not being fed. As if the purpose of the church or the pastor is somehow to feed you. Yes, I know. Jesus told Peter, feed my sheep. And we've somehow taken that phrase and overblown it and made us think that the purpose of the church is to feed me. The purpose of Sunday morning is for the shepherd, the pastor, to feed me. And if I'm not being fed, I should probably go somewhere else. Holy smokes. You realize that babies need someone to feed them. And once you start to grow up, you actually feed yourself. And the biblical model of the church is not one person shoveling feed to everybody else, but mutual encouragement and mutual ministry, because everybody in the church is gifted to serve and minister to and edify every other person. Now, I must say, as a pastor, I get my hackles up when I hear this phrase, because I've been subjected to it. I remember people leaving the church because they, quote, weren't being fed. Who knows what the heck that means anyway. And I remember those very same people coming back a few weeks later when they realized that, the pastor in the other church they went to wasn't shoveling feed any better than I was. And in time, perhaps they learned to feed themselves. Yeah. If you think the purpose of the church is somehow to, quote, feed you, and you complain you're not being fed, you might just be a consumer Christian. Number 7. And really, perhaps this is what it all comes down to. You might be a consumer Christian if you're content being a part of a church that isn't making disciples. You might be a consumer Christian if you're a part of a church that isn't reaching people, isn't building people up in the faith, isn't multiplying disciples. It's not growing you up. It's just not happening. People aren't being reached, they're not growing, they're not becoming more mature. Nasty people aren't becoming less nasty. People aren't being equipped to use their gifts. That's what's happening in the church, and you're somehow okay with it. You might even consider it a good church. If that's the case, you're solidly entrenched in consumer Christianity. Because the purpose of the church is to make disciples, and if I'm not being equipped to make disciples, to be a disciple, to multiply my faith, then there's something lacking. I'm sure there's other traits of consumer Christians and consumer-based churches, but what's the solution? I'm sure I've used this quote in the past. You get points for building arks, not predicting rain. In other words, finding problems is no great gift. Anybody can do that. What is the solution? Well, Mark chapter 8, verse 34 to 38, really flies in the face of consumer Christianity, where Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for man to gain the whole world yet forfeit his soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. Jesus says if anyone wants to come after him, this is true. And I remember when I came across that passage as a teenager, that's the first passage I ever memorized independently. because I realized it was a critical passage, a very important passage. It applies to anyone at all following Jesus. It's about self-denial. It's not about consuming. It's about contributing. It's about following Jesus as Jesus wants to be followed. And so the solution, the antidote to consumer Christianity, is simply to choose to follow Jesus, to choose to join Jesus on mission. And you might not know, and I'm still peeling back the layers and understanding all that means. You might not know exactly what it means, but if you start out on that path, on that trajectory, you'll figure it out. He'll help to figure it out. Let's wage war on consumer Christianity. Not so much by attacking consumer Christianity, but by checking out of consumer Christianity and following Jesus passionately, joining him on mission. Well, here I am at the caffeination station because I have a punch card for the caffeination station, and I'm punching number 10 today, and then I get a free coffee or whatever.
Good morning.
Good day.
Good day. What can I make for you today, senor?
I'm just going to have a regular coffee, and I will have a biscuit.
There is that one cream, and I went to the light side for you today.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. And one warmed up biscuit for you.
That's it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a beautiful day.
You too.
See you.
Yep. There you have it. Caffeination station. Punch card is full. We're good. Just doing my part as a consumer to keep the economy going.
Oh yes, we are the people running in the race, buying up the bargains in the old marketplace. Another sale on something, we'll buy it while it's hot and save a lot of money spending money we don't got. We save a lot of money spending money we don't got.